Good evening once again, YouTube. I hope you had a good day. I know I did. I'm here to bring up a question that I think is obvious but overlooked when reading the Bible. And that is, as you may already know from the title, do Jews go to heaven? This question is mainly meant to be answered by Christians, because the heaven I'm talking about is the Catholic Christian heaven. I ask this question because I didn't understand when I first read and learned about the Bible, and I saw something odd that I don't think most other people see when they read the Bible. The Bible talks about one God, not the God of the Jews and then the God of the Christians. The Bible says it's one God. Now, today, in our world, obviously Christianity and Judaism are two different religions. They have their similarities, but they're two different religions. While we know that, it seems strange that in the Christian Holy Book, they have the same exact God, not variations in the same God, like the God of the Muslims and the God of the Christians, but the same exact God. And it's strange because all moral advice given, or moral advice or commands given in the Old Testament and the New Testament seem to directly contradict each other. Jesus said to forgive or befriend, or forgive, I don't exactly remember, your enemies, and to turn the other cheek, and to love everyone. While the Old Testament says to hate your enemies, stone non-believers, and viciously beat your children every day. And it was strange to me that I asked myself the question, did God have some sort of revelation in the time between the Old Testament and the New Testament? If the Old Testament God is the same as the New Testament God, then something is obviously wrong, because the Old Testament God was the worst bully in the history of the world. And somehow, that God who gave his son, who's also himself, so has the same characteristics as Yahweh, yet Yahweh and Jesus are as different as they can be. Now, this makes absolutely no sense, because they are alleged to be the same God, yet they are obviously not the same in the least. And this brings up the question, do Jews go to Catholic Christian heaven? Because did God use the Jews in the time leading up to Jesus' birth just so Jesus could be born? Did he use the Jews until that point and then change teams and become the God of the Christians? So while the Jews thought that if they acted in accordance with their holy books, they would go to heaven, but all of a sudden their God is no longer their God, but the God of the Christians. And then this brings up another question, which is, did God lie to the patriarchs that he made these covenants with? Did God lie to Abraham? Did God lie to all the famous Jews of the Old Testament? And was he just using them and leading them along for the specific purpose that their being in existence would lead to the birth of a son who would in turn save the world? Now, if this is true, which it might not be, but it certainly isn't false, because it's a glaring contradiction that cannot be justified or denied. The Old Testament God and the New Testament God, who is also his Son, are obviously extremely different and cannot even be called the same God, in my opinion. Now, either this shows a extreme lack of communication between the writers of the Old Testament, or not the writers of the Old Testament, but the Old Testament itself, and the writers of the New Testament. If the Bible is supposed to be the ultimate holy book and the ultimate manual to morality for all of humankind for all eternity, you'd think that they would notice and edit out such an enormous contradiction. But apparently they didn't, which leaves people like myself and the other non-believers out there who may be asking themselves the same question: do Jews go to heaven? Only God knows.